Hello and welcome to the KFC Supercoach AFL podcast. I'm Al Payton from the Herald Sun. We've had a few late outs of the pod today, but I've got the Supercoach investor, Dan Bagala, with me, and we're going to talk about how we try and finish our teams off, how we fared obviously on the weekend, and how we're going to try and navigate the final 6 or 7 rounds of the season to try and get through to that KFC Supercoach League Grand Final, or as high as we can in the overall ranks. So, Dan, welcome aboard, and can you perhaps just fill us in on how you went on the weekend and sort of how you placed coming into those final few crucial rounds that we've got to go?
Thanks for having me, Al. Yeah, it was a pretty... It was very much a topsy-turvy weekend. It was bookended by disappointment, no doubt, but I started the round off with CCJ's 5, and it was at R3, so it was actually forced onto my field from the start. So pretty frustrating night on Thursday to begin the round, and then it obviously recovered from that because Dangerfield Friday night was absolutely fantastic, alongside Parrish scoring 184 points. But yeah, I ended up with 23.84, pretty solid score, but as I said, it got bookended by some disappointment, and that was me putting the captaincy on Bontempelli, who was probably the most informed player in the comp over the past 4 to 6 weeks. And then on Sunday, went pretty disappointingly by foot. He didn't hit too many targets. He tried to pinch a few really difficult 45 kicks, etc. And as such, his score was only 83. So it felt like the one that got away, given I'd sort of recovered from the disappointment of CCJ in the first game of the round. But it did feel like I probably gave up another 50, 60 points, missing Steele's 154, or even McRae with the 138. So it was a pretty disappointing final game of the round. But look, 23.84 with a 5. It shows that the portfolio is going well. But I do need to fill out that R2 position this week. And I'm jostling as to whether I burn 2 trades to get Grundy, or I just settle on Rowan Marshall, who was pretty renewed against Collingwood, but obviously fraught with injury risk given the plantar fascia he experienced earlier this year.
Yeah, we'll get onto him shortly because he's definitely in my sights as well. I had a similar score to you. You outscored me by about 8 points, I think, 23.76. If people were listening last week, I was a bit annoyed when I got 24.80 or something, but this week I wasn't feeling too bad about that. It's all sort of relative to expectations, I guess, because as you said, yeah, that first game of the round was an absolute nightmare, especially as a Richmond supporter that did not enjoy watching that game at all. CCJ had one of the worst games of the season. Just couldn't get a touch in the first quarter, and then they subbed him out at halftime. I think he finished, he might have been on 6 points at that time, and he got scaled down one, finished with 5, and I had him on the field. I was hoping to get away with playing him as my last forward for a couple more weeks, and I didn't. I know some people were able to loophole him. I think the Phantom was able to loophole him with Cody Waitman, which worked out pretty well for him. But my forward bench isn't looking so good at the moment with Madden and Briggs both out, so had to play him, and yeah, that didn't work. And then Jaden Short was pretty disappointing, only in the 60s, and Dusty just sort of okay. And then after the game, I realised that in making trades and reversing trades and all these kinds of things, I'd actually reverted back to having the VC on Dusty, which I'd had from the week before. So that left me with no sort of second crack at the captaincy. I just had to go all out. So in the end, I just put it on Jack McRae because I thought that was the safest play, and that worked out really well for me. Although watching the Saints, I thought, geez, I should have just gone Jack Steele. But McRae was really good, and I probably would have VC'd Max Gawn or maybe Dane Zorko, so probably didn't actually cost me all that much in the end. But I made one trade, which was I got finally traded out Matthew Flynn, who's been a fantastic servant for us at R3, traded him down to Jake Edwards, the 102k forward ruck from North Melbourne, who we don't expect to play. But initially when I did that, I was thinking that CCJ would be handy as a sort of a bench player in the forward line, and I could use him to cover my ruck line for the rest of the season. But now, after what happened with Coleman Jones, I'll probably trade him. And, then I'm looking at maybe that gives me an added reason to potentially get Rowan Marshall in, who could cover if a Grundy or a Gawn miss for a week in the ruck. But I suppose we'll got 2 or 3 big players I want to talk about, and then maybe some bargain options and some bench quandaries as well. But we'll probably start with that Grundy one, because there'll be a few people in your situation who traded Grundy out over the buys and when he was injured. And for a while, it looked like that was the smart play, but he's come back and he's been really good, 130, 120 in his return. Now, he plays Richmond on Sunday as well, and I'd be looking at him as a serious captaincy option if I think there's talk Nankervis might come back, but if he doesn't, I think Dan Batten's man, Chris Burgess, turned up for Gold Coast on the weekend. He was sort of getting a few little stints in the ruck, and he managed to score 100 against Marby or Chol. So if Grundy's playing against Marby or in the ruck, that could be a ticket for another massive score. So unfortunately for people like you, Grundy hasn't really dropped in price. He's come down a little bit, but it's still going to be pretty hard to get him. And then I guess the key equation, it all sort of plays into the big question, whether you've got Grundy or not. But for anyone who's looking to make those one or two sort of final moves, how many trades you've got left and how many you think you can get away with, bearing in mind there's still 7 rounds to play, which is pretty much every weekend something has gone haywire in KFC Supercoach. So if you think you can get through the last 6 or 7 rounds with nothing going wrong, that's very optimistic. So, you're in the situation with Grundy. Other people might be looking at, could I get Dane Zorko? But it would take 2 trades to do that. What's your take on your own personal Grundy situation? And for people who are in that situation, how many trades would you be prepared to go down to try and get those real, uber premiums? And, are there 2 or 3 players that you would do that for? And, for others, would you just be better off trying to find someone cheaper and trying to preserve a trade or 2?
Yeah, well, I actually did a preemptive trade. I'd planned it during the week thinking I'll get rid of Waitman at the very last minute, bring that Edwards fella in, and I'd free up the cash because Waitman's break-even was circa 72, 73, and that was roughly a little bit higher than his average. But as we saw, he was the bear in the square. He kicked the first 3 goals of the game. He was probably the most damaging player in the game, and he took some amazing hangers and got tunnelled a few times. So he just knows how to throw his head back when he's in the air and earn those free kicks. But groovy little player that's going to be a really tough small forward to defend in the years to come. But I moved him off to free up some capital, took me down to 3 trades. Saw that obviously CCJ won't play this week due to being subbed out of the game, so I suspect he won't play. Also don't want to ever field him again in my side. But I was thinking Grundy was the move. I'd have to do another trade to make it happen because obviously it's such a massive gap and dichotomy between the price points of CCJ and Grundy. It's about 330 grand. So I'd have to move Highmore off as well, and then that would take me down to 2, and then the final trade would be upgrading CCJ to Grundy. So that would be a full team, everyone's premium on every line, with the key premiums from every line being, let's just say, Laird down back, Bontempelli in the middle, Grundy going in the rucks, and then Zorko up forward with Dangerfield, another person I think will usurp him by year's end. But I feel a bit too exposed if I run with one trade until the season's end because as we saw, Travis Boak, hamstring scan. You get knocked out, you're out for 2 weeks, you miss a game. So I suspect the only way I would do it was if I was confident that the game was going into a frenzy and there was some sort of trade repertoire will be offered, but that's just a bit of a pie in the sky thought. So for me, I probably will opt for Marshall, take a haircut, do the one trade. It does feel underwhelming putting him at R2, come up against Grundy every week. But look, my team's pretty strong around the grounds, so I think it's something I'll have to consider because 2 trades is better than 1. And just hoping that Marshall's on the build and he's getting better week on week. He's playing more game time. He's gone from about 55, 60% to about 65%. But, geez, it does feel very risky, underwhelming, all the above with bringing him in. But 2 trades does give you a bit more confidence than 1. 1, I don't think you'd be able to get through the final 6 weeks with 1 trade. But as we saw, the winners from seasons gone past have done so with no trades from roughly the buys. So you can get lucky, but there'd be nothing worse than going into a round, particularly a big final, fielding 21 or 20 players. There'll be no worse feeling to have done all the great work and let it unravel in the final few weeks. So it's about a bit of self-preservation between now and then, I think, and probably taking a haircut and forgetting Grundy, which will hurt, but I'd rather have a player on the field than 2 donuts for the final 2 weeks, I suspect.
Yeah, I think the fandom's been big on this. That you sort of, if you're thinking of, if you're thinking of leagues, that's your most important thing. Then that's exactly what you're talking about. But when league finals come around, I mean, it'd be great to have at least 1 trade in your pocket that you can make a late swap if you have to. And being caught short with 1 or 2 fewer players on field than your opponent's going to be really difficult to overcome, and that'd be a really painful way to end the season. But he also makes the point that with overall points, when you're this far out, you might gain 20 or 30 points a week by picking a Grundy over a Marshall type in the ruck. But then if you get another injury somewhere else and you end up playing with 2 donuts at the end of the year, that might cost you 150 points.
Yep.
So this is probably the smart way to play it. In my personal situation, I was my original plan was, by trading down Flynn, that gave me plenty of cash in the bank, and it was the idea behind it was that this week I could then use it to get Lachie Neale and Patrick Dangerfield, and I was going to trade Patrick Cripps out and to Neale in the midfield, and I was going to trade. I've still got Lachie Jones sitting in my defensive bench, and I was going to be able to use that cash to get Dangerfield. That was the theory, but I needed Dangerfield to go down by $2,000, and obviously that is not going to happen after he scored about 180 on the weekend. So that sort of plan was quickly scuttled, and then I was thinking, oh man, do I just get? I really wanted Lachie Neale because I really liked what I've seen from him the last couple of weeks. He was coming up against Adelaide this weekend, and if he had played, I probably would have pulled the trigger and traded Cripps to him before that game, but probably saved me the fact that he was a laid out because Cripps, even though, God, when he was injured earlier, I thought this is turning into an absolute nightmare, but he came back on and real battled on like the warrior that he is. I was pretty happy with Cripps' performance, actually. He probably was unlucky to only score 89 given some of the hard work he did, but I guess he couldn't really kick, so that probably hurt his scoring potential. But so what I'll probably do now is just I can't afford Dangerfield and Neale anymore, so I'll just get Dangerfield as my last midfielder. I was originally going to get him in the forward line, but I don't think there's too much of an issue having him in the mids the way the form he's in. And then how much money have I got in the forward line is less than what I'd hoped, but Marshall is there in the frame. And given, as I said, with CCJ probably out, the fact that he offers that ruck forward cover for my ruck line with Edwards as a ruck forward on my ruck bench, that is a little bit of an extra reason to pick him. As you said, there is definitely a risk. Like, he's only played, I think, 7 games this year. He's got injured in a couple of them. And something you mentioned a couple of times that, in a couple of those games, you feel a hot spot in your foot halfway through the second quarter and you just straight off and you might end up with 25 points or something. And obviously that's a potential trade that you'd have to use as well. But you just hope that he's got it right. The Saints are miraculously only a game or half a game out of the 8. Their percentage is pretty awful. But if they could string a few wins together, they're still in the hunt for the final. So they're going to want to keep playing him, and hopefully if his body's coming good. He looked pretty good against the Pies on the weekend. It wasn't a great game, but he managed to ton up. Could have potentially scored a bit more. I don't know, maybe he knew that when he took a mark on the siren and the Saints had obviously already won after a bit of a horrible last quarter. They nearly gave it up, but he could have had a goal after the siren, but he missed that shot by about 30 metres, didn't even register a score, but I guess was probably not going to help his Supercoach points much at that point, so maybe he wasn't too worried. But yeah, he's down 120k on his starting price. So I think given the price, 437, like I bought, when I saw Stephen May around that price, I just jumped on him, even though I didn't think he was an uber premium, but I just thought, at that price, you almost can't go wrong. So I think that definitely lessens the risk. The Saints have a really tough draw. They play 5 top 8 teams coming into the final 7 rounds or so of the home and away season. But looking at his results against the next 2, they're actually pretty good. Like, they play Brisbane this week. His past 2 against them, 96 and 119. And against Port Adelaide the next week, which you think that'll be a really tough matchup. His past 2 against Port, he scored 160 and 139. So hopefully that's not going to hold him back too much. So, yeah, I think Marshall's coming into my team as well. We're having a chat with the Clem, who's now ranked number 1 overall in Supercoach. We're hoping to get him on the pod, but we had some technical issues there. Hopefully that'll be next week. But he brought Marshall in last week, and he said he was pretty happy with that move. So that gives me a little bit more confidence as well. The other one that I suppose should quickly mention, Dangerfield. I mean, it's not even really a discussion now, is it? Like, you just have to have him 184 against the Bombers after warming up with a couple of 90s the week before that. I thought I could get away with waiting one more week, but everyone who jumped on early saw the signs, definitely reaped the benefits. Yeah,
I saw the first clearance of the game. Ball went up. It came down. Within a second, he'd come through flying through mid-air handball straight to an outside player, and I just thought, he's on tonight. I honestly thought straight away I've missed an opportunity VC. It was about 10 seconds into the game. And then I started computing in my head. I said, why do I think tonight is the night? And I thought, he's been pretty solid the last few weeks, had a lot of shots at goal, probably just been bad by foot. But the main catalyst, I thought, was the fact that he'd just been hit from pillar to post in the media. Throughout the week, they were just giving him stick, saying he needs to pull his finger out. Now's danger time. It's time to go to the danger zone, all those sorts of factors. And then game at Skilled, Friday Night Lights, against a team that doesn't really tag. And he was just back to his absolute best, like the cheeky best, like when he played with the umpire and pushed him back for a little kick for Tom Hawkins. It looked like he had that swag back in his repertoire, and I was really excited to see that. So at 533k, a mid forward, it's still an opportunity for a discounted premium there. I still think he's a 600k, 620k mid forward. And I said to a few of my friends before we did this podcast, I still think that between now and conclusion of the season, I think he'll be the highest performing forward. I think he'll average the most points between now with the 7 games to go. I just think the ballistic game he plays, Cat's really trying to sew away a top 2 position if they can. All of it sort of plays into Danger's favour. So at 533k, I wouldn't be too phased whether you had him in the guts or whether you had him in the forward line, because the key between now and the end of the year is to have as much dual position flexibility as you can. And I actually would like to have him in somewhere like that, just to float him across both lines. And if you have to play a Trent Bianco or a Duke Nukem if he performs, or a Thomas Heim or whoever it needs to be, I think teams need to accept that between now and season's end, you're not going to have a premium in all 22 spots every single round until season's end. There will be games where you'll have to play 128k rookie to cover for someone that's got concussion symptoms from the week before and things like that. So don't get too flashy and don't set your expectations too high, because there will be injuries, and past experiences we've had throughout the year, it's been a year littered with injuries. So just be mindful that will continue to occur, I suspect.
Yeah, I think how I sort of like to play it is what I've got my team set up at the moment, where I've got all my sort of mid forwards in the forward line, those premiums, and then I've got Finn McRae on my midfield bench, so I can sort of do a bit of a switch there if I need him. But probably having a mid forward premium in the midfield is not a bad situation to be in, given the forward depth issues on my bench there, that I really don't have any cover. So if I did have a forward injury, I could bring Dangerfield down, and then I could bring on a Newcomb or something like that in the midfield. So that sort of gives me an extra layer of protection there, I guess. I mean, if you've already got Dangerfield, which obviously a lot of people do, and or maybe you don't have that much money, there's a couple of other players that are generating a bit of interest this week that are a bit cheaper. Probably the standout, I reckon, is Jordan De Goey, just 407k. He seems like Robert Harvey wants to play him as a midfielder. He scored 115, 114 in his last 2 games. Faces the Tigers this week. They're hitting the form they're in. You think he should go all right? Is he someone you would consider? I mean, the other one that I really, maybe if I get to only a couple of rounds to go and just, you take an absolute throw at the stumps, I would love to pick Buddy. But he's $4.99 now, so he's not that cheap. But he's only had 1 game below 90 in his past 6, and he's had 3 tons in the last 2, 130 and 113. So is there any part of you that would consider flirting with him? And what do you think of De Goey as a sort of a bit of a bargain premium to finish a forward line?
Yeah, I'd probably only pick Buddy if we were sort of 2 weeks out and there was some motivation for him to really perform. Maybe he's within 10 goals of his 1,000 goal threshold, or the Swans are up for the top 4 or trying to survive finals. But De Goey's an interesting one. We've got to look at the situation we've got on hand, like new coach, new role, seems to be getting that opportunity playing the guts. I think Harvey said if you want it, you can have it. You've got an 8-week stint at having a crack at it. I don't know whether I could take that punt on De Goey, I don't think, because I just think that obviously injury history, he hasn't played the role before and he's had 2 great weeks. But for me, I'd still look at bringing in blokes like Hall, Zeeble, Zorko, anyone like that. But I can't. Do you know off the top of your head what De Goey's priced at? What's he priced at?
407.
Yeah, well, I guess he is
pretty cheap.
Yeah, he's very cheap relative to Dangerfield. And I guess I'd always preference Dangerfield at 120 grand more if you've got the cash. But if you were to compare him with Rowan Marshall, roughly the same price, 437k, I think Marshall might be, you'd probably go De Goey on the notion that Marshall does have a lot more inherent risk associated with him. The foot really worries me because, I mean, what do we do in this game? We kick, we cover a lot of ground, and then we ruck and we land really awkwardly in those rucking contests. Like you can have your weight shifted in the air, come down hard on your right foot, flares up. But then I spoke to a physio mate and I said, look, what is the outlook on a plantar fasciitis? And he says he could be recovered. And I said he's had 6 weeks off. He says that's about right and that should be enough to get there. But again, we're not medical professionals. We don't know his exact circumstances. But I kind of think I'll take the risk on him. Like I think that with Rowan, he can score like 60 points in a quarter if he's on. And Paddy, we don't know what's going to go on. Like Paddy might be rested. Obviously, he flew back to WA for some family connections there. So I think that Paddy might potentially play 5 or 6 of the next 7, I suspect, just to get him cherry ripe if they make the finals. Because if you look at the Saints, Paddy Ryder can jump on any ruckman's head. Like in the centre bounce, he will win every centre bounce if the ball bounces straight up or in his favour. Whereas around the ground, he's not as dangerous as what I think Marshall is. Marshall's a bit more nimble, really good field kick, whereas Paddy Ryder is that jack-in-the-box ruckman that you just can't stop in the centre bounces. So I will probably take the punt on Marshall. It does feel very nerve-wracking, but with my predicament being I don't want to go down to one trade just to get Grundy, I think it's the move I probably make.
What about someone that I know, our good friend Tim Mitchell's got a very close eye and has been checking in the Port Adelaide injury reports for weekly for about the last 12 weeks. Zach Butters played in the SANFL at the weekend. I think Phantom posted that he scored 133 KFC Supercoach points at SANFL level, and there's a good chance he'll come straight back in this week. He's 501k with a break-even of 143. Would you like to have a look at him and maybe hold off for a week on that trade? And he'd be a pretty handy point of difference for the run home. Yeah,
he'd be an amazing point of difference. I mean, did you say his break-even was 143?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you give him 1 week, definitely, because, I mean, he's had a substantial layoff. And the SANFL, unfortunately, all respect to the players that run around, the weekend warriors that play in the SANFL, it's not the big show, the AFL. So he's had 21 and 2, so it's a pretty handy game. We know he's capable of more. We've seen games in the AFL where he's had that to half time. So I think he's a prodigious talent. He's going to be an absolute. He could actually be the pick of that trio, being Butters, Rosie, and Dersma. But I wouldn't be taking a bloke that's had a 10-week layoff with nerve damage and some pretty substantial ankle injury without having a swing at the stumps and seeing how he goes this week. With a break even of 143, he's not going to rise at all, most likely. But if he does, it'll be marginal. If he has a Darcy Parish 190. He'll only go up about 10 grand. So I would give him a look. I know there's a few guys out there that absolutely love Zach Butters, but could be a massive pod on the way home because people won't have the trades to bring him in and people won't have space in their forward lines without sacrificing someone. But what I do think will happen between now and year's end is that players like myself, players like you, when an injury happens in your midfield, you probably will shift Danger into the guts and happily bring in a Zach Butters discounted relative to others because he can score with the utmost premiums. But for me, I wouldn't be touching. My forward line's complete. I have the Tomahawk at F6, and as we saw, his 3 quarters post-quarter time were up there with the best I reckon he's played all year. He was fantastic in the mud, so good performance from the Toma.
Yeah, and he's dropped a fair bit in price too, so another one you could consider, and which we both brought him in, I think, a couple of weeks ago, and his first game or two wasn't too great, but you're sort of picking him on the, for the 10-week block, that key forwards are going to have some down scores, but hopefully he'll have some big ones, and the Cats have a pretty amazing run home. I think the last 3 games at the Cattery, so he usually scores pretty well down there. If you're looking for a bargain at the other end of the ground, Jordan Ridley down to 495k, I think he's very safe pick. What about Carlton man Nick Newman, another phantom favourite with Sam Doherty out? He scored 99 and 106 in his past 2, and he's only 428k.
Yep.
Is he someone you'd consider?
Yeah, I was chatting to Fantasy Freako about that because he's in the predicament where he needs to get someone under a certain price point. And I actually think that Newman is going to benefit substantially from the absence of Sam Doherty. I think from watching the game pretty closely on Saturday night, he pretty much had a monopoly, I felt, on the kick-in duties. He's pretty cheeky. He can go across his body. He can kick the 15-metre dinks, and he can also hit the long pack-forming sort of kicks. I think he's a great pick. We've seen in the past he can average over 100. We've seen in the past that he's got great disposal efficiency, and he can also take intercept marks. My only concern is he's had that patella injury. He's had a few pretty substantial injuries that I hope he's seen the back of now. But for me, he's a cheeky pod, definitely a cheeky pod who could score the best of the Carlton backmen between now and season's close.
Actually, what about another Carlton man, one of your favourites? I should have mentioned him when we were talking the forward line. For people who maybe just really have no trades and nowhere to go with CCJ, it's nearly a straight swap to Paddy Dow. 291k mid-forward, scored 88 and 84 in his last 2. I think he was in the 80s at half-time on the weekend, but faded a bit. Is that something you could actually consider?
I could not fault his first quarter. I couldn't fault his first half, to be honest. I saw attributes of a player that I didn't think were there. I saw a player that had, honestly, I'm going to call it now, I actually saw things that reminded me of a young Dangerfield. Honestly, some of the things he did, he was in one contest on the ground where the ball's in dispute. He dragged the ball in, tackled the bloke, literally wrenched it out of the pack, got up and fired off a handball. And some of the things like exploding from contests were things that were not in his repertoire or in his skill set. And for me, I just think that the only thing he's going to have to work over pre-season and probably the end of this year with the experience he'll get is building an engine so he can actually contribute for the entirety of the game. Because as you saw, 70 points at halftime, 85 at the game, runs out of gas, petrol tickets, whatever you like to call it. But I've had a few people reach out to me about 2 weeks ago saying, I think I'm going to get stuck with Dow at F7 and M9. And I said, there's nothing wrong with that. He'll get every chance to play. And last 2 weeks, that was the Dow that I thought I picked up in round one. But it took him a few months to get there. And kudos to him because a lot of people wrote him off. And I think he'll be a player for the years to come.
Now, the other issue that I wanted to address this week is just the bench situation. I think I'm probably not the only one here who has a lot of donuts going around on the bench. I mean, how's your team looking, and how big an issue is that? Is that something that you need to be thinking about when you're making trades? Because as you say, if I have a midfielder who goes out, I can sort of cover them and play a Newcomb or a Bramble for a week, and I'm sort of happy to cop that, even if it's like a 60-point score. It's a lot better than a zero. But if someone goes down in the forward line or defence, I'm in massive trouble. But it's hard to find a way out of it. I saw something about Lockie Jones might only be a couple of weeks away, so maybe if I'm hanging on to him, hopefully he comes back and plays the last few weeks. And Madden might come back in for the Lions. Briggs, who knows? They need to give Mummy a rest at some point. But how's your bench looking? And how can you actually protect it? Is there a way to do that in the last 7 rounds?
Yeah, well, I've got Thomas Highmore in the defence with Trent Bianco being able to loop him down to the defence if really need be. I've got that Fife fella sitting at D8 who's been great for me all season. Then into the guts, I've got Duke Newcomb, Jai Newcomb, who's been pretty solid. He looks like he's got good JS, job security. And then Trent Bianco can sit there as well if I need him. The one that disappoints me a little bit is Keanu Reeves, obviously averaging 86 points, sitting at R3. It just doesn't look like he's going to get a look in at the moment. But look, I suspect Clark Oates in his best interest to develop that fella and get him going for the rest of the year. And I think that kudos to Segler, kudos to the 30 club, the 30-year-old club. But I think they'll try and get a few games into him before the end of the year. So I'm confident if something does happen, we might have some R3 coverage. Then in the forward line, I've got Jake Edwards, obviously. I think his name's Jake Edwards or Edwards. It's got a J. It's definitely a J.
Oh, no, that's the North guy, yeah.
Yep, North and Briggs. So I was thinking of moving out Highmore, if need be, and turning him into Isaac Chugg, which is the young guy from Collingwood, because then it would mean I could move Briggs between the defence and the forward. Because I do think that Briggs will come in. There was some quotes suggesting that Mummy was already a little bit sore from that last game. Obviously, Gawn would have given him a bit of a touch-up. And I think that Briggs and Flynn need to start building that synergy together with oneself. But that does leave me a bit scared. I feel most nervous in the ruck with Reeves unavailable at the moment. And then Edwards won't play at all, I would suspect. And Briggs is a week-by-week prospect, it seems, despite the fact he's clearly talented and he's scored when he's played, which is a bit frustrating as an owner.
Yeah, I think I saw that Isaac Chugg popped up. I think he's number 10 on the most traded in players this week. We did mention him pre-season as a potential bolter, but I don't know that we've heard his name since then. I don't know that he's any chance of really getting a game. But the key, obviously, is that I think he's a def forward, isn't he?
Yep.
DPP. So if you've only got 2 or 3 guys on the bench who are playing, but if you can flip them around between the lines where you need them, that could be the key to it. But it's always tricky, obviously, depending on who plays when on the weekend and things like that, and knowing if players are out. But I was a bit surprised when I saw that. I was thinking, gee, it's a long way out to be bringing in someone, a zero player. But if it enables you to move a Briggs or Madden, we need them to be playing. But if they come back in and you can, cover 2 lines with them, then that is potentially not a bad idea. If you had so I was in the position of having CCJ at F6, and I think he, pretty much has to go. There's no two ways about that. But what about people who are trying to get away with playing a Highmore as a D6? Is that, do you just need to get those guys into a premium, or, would you prefer to, if you're down to 3 or 4 trades, just, try and back him in and hope you can get a few more weeks out of him at least?
Well, I guess it comes down to that balance of ranking pursuit versus league pursuit. And I think Josh Layla was pretty strong on this last week. He says the person that will win the league is probably the person that bows out of the rankings race at the earliest point. And I guess we're now 7 weeks out and you're still chasing rankings. I think you just got to throw caution to the wind a little bit here. And as we saw on the weekend, Highmore's probably max scoring is about 110, 115 from that Adelaide game where he just became Superman for the St Kilda Saints. But then on the weekend, just couldn't really get near it in the wintry conditions at the MCG. He had a few nice moments, but scored 49. So that's the difference between a premium and a sporadic up-and-coming rookie. You do get some scoring discrepancy week to week, but I wouldn't be too phased. Like if you just got to work out, sit down, put it on a piece of paper. Am I chasing rankings or am I chasing league? And if you're chasing league, trade aggressively, move him on and try and get in a Caleb Daniel or a Jordan Ridley or a Robert Millsy Mills if you can, because those are the guys that are scoring and they're still relatively available. But that's the way I'd go about it. But back to that point you were talking about before, if I bring Chug in, for example, and he could be the most popular player until season's end, but effectively teams dropping Thursday night, confirmed 5 p.m. on Friday, you can literally just put a Trent Bianco into the line where you think someone could be a late withdrawal and hope that they don't get dropped or withdrawn, and accept that you probably will have no coverage in one particular line, but you're confident those players will get up and play. So that's probably how I'm going to have to balance my team, and there's probably susceptibility to donuts. But then if I do that one trade has to be used very wisely. If a Travis Boak doesn't get up this week to play Melbourne, well, guess what? Trent Bianco, you're suiting up. You're going to have a crack, and so is Jai Newcombe potentially. The better of the two will come on for me. But if someone does a hamstring into 3-week injury, I'll be using that trade and moving them on and then riding a donut to season's end. So big decisions for me this week, whether I go Grundy, burn 2 and get left with 1, or whether I take the haircut, take Marshall, save a trade, have 2 to run for the rest of the season, but then have the inherent risk of that hot spot flaring up in his foot, which would be a disaster, like if that happened.
Yeah, I don't know if you would need to do this to get the 2 trades, but a lot of us are down to so few that we're not really looking too much at rookies, but there's some people who, if you don't have much cash in the bank and you need to try and turn a CCJ into a Dangerfield or something like that, you might have to trade down to a rookie somewhere. And there actually are a few decent ones on offer this week. I don't know if you've had much of a close look, but Jeremy Sharp's probably the standout, actually bubble player at 141k. A little bit annoying that he's a slightly elevated price after playing 1 or 2 games last year, but he didn't score too many points then, but he scored 76 and 79 in his first 2 games for the Suns, break even of negative 72, so he looks pretty handy. But yeah, 141k. Leo Connolly for the Saints, 123. Now he's a def mid, which could be handy, and he scored 23 and 35 in his first 2 games. He came on as the sub in the last quarter in that first game and then played the full game on the weekend. I think Brad Ratton said something after the game that he was quite happy with him and he wants to keep playing these guys, so probably a decent shout to stay in the team, as you're not going to get too many points out of him, but it might free up some cash and give you some flexibility. Blocky Bramble, we mentioned, 155k, so he had his first price rise, but he looks pretty solid pick, and that's still not super expensive. I mean, another interesting one is Finlay McRae. If people don't have him, he's actually lost 14k from his rookie starting price. He's down to 112, and he's got a break-even of 54, so he could drop. I don't know how low you could actually go into, because could you go under 100k? He's scored 6 and 6 in his last 2 games, where in both cases he's come on as the sub very late. But he is a mid forward, and I mean, maybe the Pies will actually give him a decent run. But yeah, that's a pretty amazing one. You could just be one to keep an eye on, see how cheap he does get. And the other name just that I would throw out if he gets picked this week, which I wouldn't be surprised at all if he does, is Matt Parker for the Tigers. He's been doing a lot in the VFL, had I think 29 touches and 10 tackles last weekend, and I mean, Richmond definitely needs that kind of spark. As we said, we might have been talking off air about Shai Bolton. Not sure what's going on with him. Maybe he's still feeling some of the after effects of that wrist injury, but he's really been off the boil, and Richmond definitely lacking in that sort of department, and forward pressure, they've really fallen away as well. So I wouldn't be surprised at all if he comes in, mid-season draft pick, obviously, who we've seen before at the Saints. So he should be fairly comfortable at the level. Would be big call to pick someone on in their first game, but at least we know who he is. And mid forward could be handy going down the track as well to potentially, as we say, cover across a couple of lines if he can stay in the team. That's assuming he's picked, but yeah, my tip is I reckon he'll come in this week.
Yeah, I think Matt Parker was a pretty decent rookie in his first season. I mean, he had some very low scores, and then he had some substantial scores where he took hangers, kicked goals. And I think players like that, you look at their motivation levels. He's gone back to the Western Australian leagues. I think he might have played.
Yeah.
He's earned his opportunity through the mid-season draft, and I think Dimmer will have to seriously look at a spark. He'll have to look at something, because there looks like there's a few cracks forming at Richmond at the moment. I don't know whether it's culture. I don't know whether it's form. I'm not sure whether it's game plan. I just think that they're the walking wounded right now, and teams are finally ganging up a little bit, which is probably a sight for sore eyes for those that have been on the receiving end of the odd Richmond shellacking over the last 4 years. But look, I think he'll come in, hopefully. But I don't think, for me, he's going to be too relevant because, as I said, I either have 2 or 1 trades at the end of this weekend, and I don't think I'll have space for him. But I did like little Sharp at Gold Coast, long-haired, got a conservative amount of the footy, but kicked a nice goal late, and there's not too many rookies at 140 grand averaging 77 points with an immediate 50, 60 grand worth of appreciation, and hopefully for his sake, you're really picking him to be some coverage until season's end, because as we said, concussion rule, 2-week break, all that sort of stuff, that's a new novel feature of Supercoach this year, and there's no concessions if a player cops a minor knock and has to sit out the game. You don't have them the next week. So that's when guys like Sharp, Briggs, Newcomb, etc. come into the handy sort of zone. And I guess you've got to accept that could happen between now and season's end, because we've traded ballistically till I think we're around 16 this week, and I've probably never traded that hard before, and we haven't really had, other than 2 extra trades, we don't really have that much flexibility between now and season's end. So I really do look forward to having someone like Clem or Supercoach Mama or one of the top performers out there on the pod, because I'd love to know how they're sitting, because I guess the Supercoach is a bit of a game of anxiety, and the less number of trades you've got and the likelihood of risk occurring, the heightened fear of anxiety that arises. So I don't think I could run 7 weeks, or 6 for that matter, with 1 trade. It just feels like you're swimming with sharks. It's too dangerous.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that also comes back a bit to what we were saying before. It's someone like a Highmore, if you can manage to keep him as a bench player in defence, that would be a big win. Yep. People might need that cash to, we want to make these upgrades, but if you could just know that you've got that coverage who could come on and give you a half-decent score, it would be a lot of peace of mind in the run home. And if people are getting all the way down, I mean, thank goodness we got those extra 2 trades, or we'd basically be out already. So it's been a pretty crazy season.
Right.
Just Jeremy Sharp, I think I was just going to mention that I think he kicked 2 or 3 behinds as well from gettable shots, so he could have scored more than he did, and you think it seems like he has a pretty good spot in the Suns lineup. We'll just round everything up, Dan, with some captains talk. Have you had much of a look at the fixture this week? I like so we've got Port playing Melbourne in the first game of the round. I don't know. Yep. I think Gawn might have. I've been just waiting for that 170. I want to VC him every week, thinking it's going to happen, but he hasn't scored above about 120 for 4 or 5 weeks, so might just pass on the Melbourne guys. Fortunately, Christian Petrarca's found a little bit of form for me, which is nice. But the next game on the Friday night, Essendon Adelaide presents maybe a couple of options. A Zach Merritt type. If you had Darcy Parish, he'd be a pretty good shout. And then I suppose Dangerfield versus the Blues is probably an obvious one on the Saturday.
Yeah, well, I look at that. It's actually a long round, a very long round. It goes through to Monday, surprisingly. I didn't realise that. But bit of a snore fest on Monday, West Coast versus North Melbourne at 7:40 at night. So go to bed at midnight. Looking forward to that on Monday. But I think
our man Jake Edwards, though, will be a key player potentially playing in the last game as in.
Well, I just think then actually that is perfect. I just look at that Adelaide Oval game, and I've actually watched the last 2 Port versus Melbourne games, and Hinkley really regards Gawn, and he typically plays the double Laddams Lysett number on him. And when they're off the ball, he is getting like elbows to the back, shoulders to the back, bumped off the ball, Charlie Dixon kneeing him in the back of the head. Everything you could ask for, Hinkley he orchestrates it. So I won't be going anywhere in the same vicinity as Gawn. The other fact is Fantasy Freako put a great tweet out yesterday, and it suggested that Luke Dogger Jackson had his most centre bounce attendances and ruck contests. It was 35. And Gawn had his season low ruck contests, and that was 35. So instead of having 70 opportunities to get a hit out to advantage, he's halving that. So he's really struggling at the moment to score on par with what we suspect he's capable of. So until that role reverts back to the Gawn of old, where he's just the tall talisman that does it all on his own, I think the days of seeing Gawn are currently numbered, so I won't be going there. But I do like, I'm going to probably have to look at the Western Bulldogs, as I always do, and that's probably a look at Bontempelli or McRae at Marvel Stadium. McRae absolutely loves it there. And then outside of that, if I bring Grundy in, that's a no-brainer. Like, he'll smash an Incurvis or Mabiod Chol or whoever suits up for the Tigers. But another play we keep sort of omitting a little bit is Jack Steele has to be the most informed midfielder in the comp at the moment. He'll play Brisbane Lions. They won't tag him. He'll probably go head-to-head with Jaron Lyons, or he might go head-to-head with Neil if he plays, or even Zorko. And the most impressive thing about him is he does the defensive facet of the game as best as anyone I know. Like, if you get tackled by Steele, you don't get out of those. Like, he literally gets one arm on you and he's flipped you. He's got the best tackle technique in the absolute competition right now. And to have 11 tackles, he had an octopus +1 at half time. So that was unbelievable. The conditions favoured him. The opponent sort of favoured him being a weaker, younger, inexperienced midfield, and a few older types like Pendlebury. But Jack Steele has to be firmly in people's consideration for vice captaincy. He's got to be the most informed player in my team, apart from McRae and Bontempelli at this stage. He's flying, and I really love the way he plays.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And people who listen, we always lament about the decisions that always seem to go wrong. But he's definitely one I got right. Brought him in just before the buys, like round 12 or something like that, and he hasn't scored below about 125 since then. So, and a couple of really big scores on top of that. So yeah, he's been fantastic. I think I like Grundy as my sort of fallback on the Sunday. But yeah, there's a few decent options with, like you say, the Dogs playing Sydney. So McRae there, Steele, Danger. So, yeah, Merritt even. I guess that's the idea at this stage of the year. You're supposed to have a team full of guys who could be potential captains. So, it does give us a few options. What about Clary? You worried about how he's going?
Yeah, so obviously I watched that pretty closely on Saturday, and I noticed that obviously De Boer didn't get named to play.
No.
Didn't come as a late in that I could have suspected. And what I noticed is they didn't really even run a hefty tag on him. Like, they sort of went head-to-head and tried to beat them, and they did. Josh Kelly was fantastic. Taranto's first half was up there with his best of the year. And even Tom Green, when the game was on the line, Phantom's boy, really came to the fore and tried to chase that NAB Rising Star, I think. But I just think that, Clary, everyone talked about Clary being the most in vogue player when he had that 200-point game. He had 27 contested, 3 goals, 1, and 1 million goal assists. But I just felt like ever since then he's either been nursing something, teams have worked him out a little bit, and he hasn't been as influential as others. Whereas Bontempelli, on his way to 700 grand, has been very sustainable. It's just been 130 week on week on week and got him there. So for me, Clary, he'll pop again and do something exciting, but there's other guys in more form. Just go to the filter, last 3, last 5, Jack Steele. Jack Steele's last game against Brisbane Lions, I just looked it up then, he scored 167. So it's a pretty nice number, and that would have been in shortened quarters last year. So, there's something about Steele. I don't know what it is, but I just think that he's a man who's in control of his game, and he has a very good scoring knack relative to others because he does the defensive stuff. There's not as many midfielders in the comp that love the defensive tackling side of the business.
Yeah, and he's probably a bit better maybe offensively than maybe he gets a little bit credit for too, with when the Saints really got rolling in that third quarter and sort of put the game away, just as it turned out. But I think he had 3 or 4 direct goal assists where he was the guy kicking it inside 50 and Paddy Ryder or Marshall, these guys taking marks. So, he
just hits the scoreboard in the game as well.
Well, if he kick a couple of goals himself, that would help. But on Clary just quickly, so he's down to 599k with a break-even of 159. So,
wow.
I guess for people who don't have him like me, maybe he could be someone might be able to get snap up in a couple of weeks. And, that just goes to show, like you mentioned last week we talked about Juicy, you just fork out the money for the Bont. And it was one of my trades that I made and then reversed. during the week. I could have just had enough cash to trade Cripps straight to Bont. I would have had to miss out on Dangerfield, miss out on Neil. And I thought, well, why not just get the best player in the comp? But any time a player gets up around that 700k mark, it's just so hard to stay there. And Bond had been on an absolutely amazing run. You would have put your house on him scoring really well against North, but he drops an 80 or so. And it just always seems to happen. So just another sort of little point of evidence for the reason you don't really want to be spending absolute top dollar on players. Like there's you can usually get them cheaper.
There's a bit of that FOMO mentality that kicks in when players get there. And I guess you go from being the hunter to the hunted. And I felt like that's what happened to Bont on the weekend. Like Noble didn't have a necessarily hard tag running with him, but he put Taron Thomas on him at every opportunity he could to either develop him as a player or at least keep him accountable. And then Cunnington, when he could, would chop out, tackle him, put a hard work onto him. But the thing that let Bont down, and Frico was very strong on this, was that his kicking was probably not at his lofty standards. I reckon he turned the ball over, had to have been 5+ times, like trying too much on the kick, looking for the option that was probably not there, and he got intercepted a couple of times, and then took a great mark leading out of the goal square, and then, as we've seen with a lot of these elite mids, pretty much fatigued when they're taking the kick and missed quite considerably. So he'll bounce back, but George Hewitt will go to him this weekend, and he's pretty tough matchup. So I kind of do like when Bont has the heavy tag. I feel like he thrives. I feel like his big body, he loves the contested facet of the game. He can still wrench the ball out of a stoppage. I think he's still a pretty safe option for a 120 on the weekend, despite the likelihood of a pretty heavy tag coming his way.
All right, thank you, Dan. We'll leave it there. We've managed to get to 45 minutes, which is good. Just one final note I'll leave you with. I looked up, you talked about Buddy, and that if you had one trade left and maybe 2 rounds to go, and, maybe he needs 10 goals to get to the... What's he going for? 1,000. So,
1,000,
yeah, if you had that in his sights now, just something to keep in mind. If we get to that point, we might call back on this, that Sydney's last 2 games are against North Melbourne and Gold Coast. So... Wow. If you just needed to pull something out of the bag in Supercoach finals, just a little one to pencil in there, we might come back to in about 5 or 6 weeks' time. But, hopefully we can maybe hang on to a trade until then.
Well, he did it for me a few years ago. He kicked 10 against Carlton and won me a grand final of one of my leagues. He kicked 10 goals against Liam Jones. So he's got history. And he did it against Rance once in
he's done it a couple of times,
23.
Yeah. So, we'll put a pin in that one. All right, thanks, Dan. That's been awesome. Jump on the heraldsun.com.au and, of course, the advertiser this week as well. The Phantom's doing a massive job. I'm taking a little bit of a few days off, so he's been picking up the slack, which has been awesome. But he'll be here on Facebook, on our Supercoach Facebook page on Thursday for KFC Supercoach TV. And we'll be back next week, hopefully with a full crew for the next pod. So we'll catch you all very soon.